Well, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you. Today's presentation is part of the Presidential Primary Sources Project, and our presentation today is called Primary Source Detectives, Learning About President Ford and the 1970s Energy Crisis Through Primary Sources. And Claire today is here to present from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. The Presidential Primary Sources Project is a series we do every year from January to the beginning of April. It's every Tuesday and Thursday, so we hope you check out some of our other programs as well. And it is a partnership between Internet2, the National Archives, and the National Park Service. Just a reminder, by participating today, you are being recorded, streamed, and broadcast. We do keep all of our recordings on our YouTube channel so teachers and students can access them whenever they want. Again, we're so excited to have you, and we really want you to participate as much as possible. This is a super interactive presentation. So if you're participating via video, Southwood, you can kind of just raise your hand and we can call on you. If anyone else wants to be on video, if you can put something in the chat, I will promote you. You can also answer questions with your voice if you want to just raise your hand, the little red hand in Zoom, and we can call on you and help you unmute. And then of course there's the chat. So if you haven't already found that, it looks like a little caption bubble. Go ahead and click on that. Most of you have already been using it, but we'll use that a lot throughout the presentation. That said, make sure you're being respectful of all the interactive tools, and let's try to stay focused on what our presenter is asking. Right, and with that, I just want to thank you again. Thank you so much for joining. This is our website if you want to check out some of our future programs. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to the person you came to see. Claire, it's all yours.
Okay, and I'm going to share my screen now. All right. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Clare Shubert. I'm from the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation. My office is inside the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I used to be a teacher in a classroom, probably a lot like the classrooms you're in right now, but now I get to be a teacher in a museum. We have a variety. Actually, I'll go to the next slide here and show you. There's a picture of the museum. That picture was not obviously taken today. Today is pretty snowy out there. This was a much warmer and sunnier day, but that is a picture of the Gerald Ford Museum in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I also included some fun photos here because typically before COVID, we had some great field trips that we did inside the museum. Right now we're doing all of those virtually, but teachers, there's our website, devoslearningcenter.org. That will take you to the Learning Center's website, and that will let you know all of the free virtual classes that we offer right now, as well as what those in-person field trips look like too. But hey, if you're coming from Maryland or somewhere that's much too far to drive here for your field trip, those virtual classes are offered all of the time and they are always free. So check those out. And I'm super happy to be invited to give you this class today virtually. So for the next hour, we're going to have a whole lot of fun talking about primary sources. Our goals today, we will learn to tell the difference between what is a primary source and what is a secondary source. So right now, just give yourself a little self-check. If you hear the word primary source or secondary source and you feel really confident that you know what that means, go ahead and give yourself a thumbs up. If you're thinking, I've heard those before, but I don't feel super confident, maybe you're a shaky thumb. If you've never heard those words before, thumbs down. And guess what? Thumbs down is great because that gives me a chance to teach you about it. And if you want to share that with me, you can send it over the chat. Okay. And it looks, Therese, like Klaus would like to be promoted to join us on video. That's awesome. And remember, all of you can do that at any time. Okay, so you did that little self-check. How are you feeling about the meaning of primary sources and secondary sources? Remember, if you're a thumbs down, that's okay, because that's what we're going to learn about today. And then we're going to use our skills to analyze some primary sources, including a photograph, a speech, and a document. And by doing so, we will become primary source detectives together. Okay, so some of you might already know a few Gerald Ford facts. So we're going to do what I like to call a fist to five. If I were to ask you, hey, how many things do you know about President Gerald R. Ford? Maybe this is a brand new name to you and you've not learned much about him at all. You might still be at a fist. Maybe you know one good fact about Gerald Ford. That would be a one. all the way up to 5. So if you're on video, you can certainly show me on video how you're feeling. Are you a fist, a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? If you're using the chat, you can enter your number in the chat. Let me know how you're feeling about what you might know about President Ford. Okay, I'm seeing some fists there. Oh, Klaus is a 1. Okay, Klaus, first of all, let me know if I am saying your name correctly, but also, do you want to share that one fact that you know about President Ford?
He was president for, I believe, 8 years.
Well, he wasn't quite president that long, and I'll let you in on something. He wasn't even president for 4 years. Do you want to know why? Because he became president in a really unique way. He did not run for president. He was not elected. He was actually asked to kind of fill in when the vice president had to leave office. And then you'll never believe this, the president had to leave office too. So he became president, but he never ran for president. So he took over for a different president and then served the rest of that term. So really, he was president for less than 4 years. He is the only president to become president in that way. Let's see. Oh, Diane is a 2. And Ms. Alice's class are mostly 1s. Does anyone else want to share maybe in the chat a fact that they might know about President Ford that they can share? There are some clues in the pictures there. You might be able to figure something out just by looking at the picture. Okay, Diane says he played football in college. Absolutely. He was a big-time football star at the University of Michigan. And then we have quite a few people saying he was in the military. Yes, he served in the United States Navy during World War II. Our friends at Southwood are saying he was a Boy Scout. He sure was. Are any of you guys Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? He became an Eagle Scout and was the only president to become an Eagle Scout. We've had other presidents be Boy Scouts, but he was the first Eagle Scout. And then at Lakewood, they are saying he likes dogs. Yes, he had a lot of dogs growing up. The dog in the picture that you see there. And oh, yeah, and Kayla is saying husband of Betty. Love it. Betty Ford was his wife and served as First Lady of the United States. The picture in the middle is President Ford, First Lady Betty Ford. They're in front of the White House. And the dog is Liberty. They got Liberty after they moved into the White House. So she is my favorite White House pet. And hey, if you guys are into White House pets, we're doing a program on February 23rd with a couple of authors who wrote a book all about White House pets. So let me know if you're interested in that, and I'll send you the link for that too. Okay, so yes, he loved dogs. He played football. He was a Boy Scout. He served in the Navy during World War II. You guys know quite a few facts about him. That's really cool. And if you want to know more, go to that website that I had up on the slide earlier, because we got all kinds of information for you. So good. You know quite a few things about President Ford. And today, oh, Claus says Liberty sounds like a good name for a dog in the White House. You know, I agree. I agree. What a great name. And so you know a few things about President Ford. And now we're going to look at some primary sources and learn about some things that happened while he was the president. So here we go. Primary source. What does that mean? For those of you that were feeling pretty confident in that, you might have some good ideas about that. For some of you, you might not be quite so sure. Feel free to throw into the chat your definition of a primary source and what you think that that means. Klaus, your hand is raised. Did you want to share your definition?
It looks like Nixon resigned, so Ford took office on that day, looks like, from the newspaper.
So remember what I was just telling you about how he became president?
Yeah.
That little picture is of an actual newspaper. So that's a primary source. And yeah, that happened. So the man on the right, his name is Richard Nixon. He was the president. He was being accused of doing things wrong and things that were dishonest. So he resigned, meaning he like quit, he left office, and then Ford became the president. So that newspaper headline is from when it actually happened. So newspapers that were created at that time could be considered primary sources. So good job noticing that. Okay, and Lakewood says something from the time when it happened, like a document. Gabe at Southwood says it's written by someone who was there. Galileo in 5th grade says a resource that from someone directly involved in the event. Oh, you guys are good. Okay. So a primary source is a source that is a firsthand account of an event or a time in history from someone who was there. Okay. So if you're studying about a person, that person telling their own story becomes a primary source. If you're studying about a certain time, someone who lived during that time and maybe wrote it down, that could become a primary source. A news reporter who's right there on the scene telling you what's happening, that's a primary source. So something created by someone who was experiencing it at that time and during that time. They are great tools to use when researching. So when you are doing a project or a paper, or maybe just super curious about something, primary sources are great tools. And by analyzing those primary sources, we can learn a lot about a time in history, an event, or a person. And by analyzing them, I mean kind of picking them apart and using the clues that they give us to really put the story together. Now, primary sources can include a lot of different things. At the bottom, it says to think, pair, and share. So think for a moment, if I was studying something that happened a long time ago, or maybe a person that lived a long time ago, what are the primary sources that I might find about that would help me in my research? So think about that for a moment. And then if you're with someone in a classroom or you have a grown-up nearby, maybe tell them your idea. And then if you feel like sharing, you can raise that Zoom hand. We can unmute you, or you can enter it into the chat. But let's see if we can come up with a pretty good list here of things that could be considered primary sources. And we've already mentioned a few, and it's okay to say those that we already mentioned too. Okay, Lakewood 5th grade says newspapers. Excellent. Kale says census records. Oh, that's a good one. Like how many people and who lived where at what time. A news article, a personal journal. Diane says a book, a newspaper, a television, magazine, a document. Lakewood 5th grade says letters. All of those are great ideas. A diary. That's from Piscataway Tech. I hope I said that correctly. A diary is one of my favorite ones, along with letters. So let's see. Newspaper articles, news reports, those might be on television, they might be on the radio. Today, it could be on a podcast. Diary entries, speeches, whether that's on video or audio, or whether it's written down, what that person said during that speech, a video or audio recording, photographs, interviews. But remember, we really have to be critical thinkers here, because that's not necessarily a primary source, right? Like I could write a newspaper article right now about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, but I wasn't there to experience it. So what I would write is based on research that I did, but it's not a primary source because I wasn't there. I could use primary sources in that work, right? But what I create would not be a primary source. So all of these things can be primary sources, but we really have to think critically when we're looking at sources to think, was this person really there? Is this a firsthand account or not? So that brings us to primary source versus secondary source. So the example I just gave about writing an article about a time that I didn't live through, that would be a secondary source. So it's something that's created to tell about a topic or a person or a time that was created later, okay? And the person did not directly experience that. Now, secondary sources are created from primary sources. I might go find a bunch of really great primary sources to make my secondary source, but that's a little bit of a difference, right? Now, that's also not to say that a secondary source isn't a good source. If you're doing research and you found a great biography about someone, that is a wonderful resource to use in your research. But today we're just kind of talking about the difference there. Klaus, do you want to unmute and share your idea?
Yeah, so a primary source can also be a military draft.
Yes, it could. You know, a lot of people are really into like researching their genealogy right now. And sometimes that military draft information is a really important piece when they're trying to find their family members or their relatives and kind of put their stories together. So those records can be really important. And if you ever get a chance to come here to the Gerald Ford Museum and walk around, you will see some of those records from Gerald Ford's time in the United States Navy, including, which I think is really cool, a copy of the logbook from the ship that he was on during World War II. It's kind of like a diary of all the things that happened on that ship. So that's a pretty cool primary source to look at, and good idea there, Klaus. Okay, so on the next slide here, again, we look at the differences between primary and secondary sources. And at the bottom, there's two pictures of books. So this is just to kind of illustrate again the difference. So on the left, you see A Time to Heal, the autobiography of Gerald R. Ford. And what is an autobiography? It's a book written about a person by the person, right? So Gerald Ford wrote that book about himself, about his life, about what happened when he was the president. So that is definitely a primary source. The book on the right, however, called Truth and Honor, is a secondary source. It is a great book. It tells his story accurately and very well, but it's written by someone named Lindsay McDivitt. Lindsay is not Gerald Ford, and Lindsay did not know Gerald Ford. So even though she did use other primary sources to create her book is considered a secondary source. All right, so now get ready, get those detective muscles in order, because we're going to be primary source detectives. And we're going to look at 3 different types of primary sources and use our analytical skills to figure out what they're telling us about history. The first source we're going to look at is a photograph. Okay, now think about detectives. Think about movies or shows that you've ever watched with a detective in it. What is the very first thing a detective should do when they come on the scene? So they're called to a scene to figure out what happened. What's like the first thing they need to do? What are your ideas? Drop them in the chat or go ahead and unmute and tell me about it. What should they do first? Okay, Galileo says, look at the evidence. Diane says, ask questions. Weston says, look for clues. Miss Alice's class says, look for clues. Scan the scene, observe, and look all around. Look for fingerprints. Oh, you guys are good. You're either really good detectives or you've watched a lot of detective movies, right? I love it. Okay. And yeah, before you can even like get fingerprints or interview people or anything, the very first thing you're going to do is you're going to look, right? You're going to make observations. You're going to look, you're going to see what's where and who's where. And we're going to call that observations. And using your skill of observation is very important when you analyze a primary source. So I am going to show you a photograph, and all you need to do, detectives, first is make observations and put in the chat, what do you see? That's all. There's no wrong answer. There's no right answer. It's just what you as a detective observe. After you make those observations and just simply state what you see, then you can start to think about what might be happening and when might this picture have been taken. Okay, are you ready? Here comes our first primary source. Here, oh no. Uh-oh, I gave detectives a few clues there if you were really quick. Okay, take a look at photo number 1. And first, just observations. Look closely at this photograph and try to tell us as many things as you possibly can. You know, they always say in the detective movies, like, it doesn't matter how small you think the detail is, tell what you see. All right, traffic, lots of cars, old cars, a gas station. Okay, cars, traffic, roads. It's black and white. Yeah, the photo is black and white, which could be a clue. Standard, so the word standard, old buildings. Okay, what else do you see? Houses, question mark. It's zoomed out, like it's taken from far away. A gas station, lots of cars, traffic, a traffic jam, a highway. Okay, a store. Good observations. Anything else? Any other little details that you see? Lines, yeah, so like lines in the road. Someone says it looks like a drone shot. It's definitely taken from like up above, right? Oh, someone sees a van, a chevron sign, okay, and other signs perhaps. Street lights. Oh, you guys are very observant. The chevron sign again, okay. All right, let's move to like, all right, we see all of these things. We're thinking it might be a gas station. Oh, we see some people, we see some bushes and trees, right? Okay, so we're outside. We might be at a gas station. There's been several comments about how much traffic and cars there are. If you've ever been to a gas station with a grown-up to put gas in the car, I don't know, have you ever seen a line that long? I mean, sometimes at Costco, I've seen pretty long lines at the gas station, but I've not maybe seen that many cars. So think about, oh, Hurricane Sandy lines. Okay, so when people were perhaps preparing for a hurricane or a big storm to come, you might have seen lines like that at the gas station. So what does that tell you? If you know you've seen lines like that when something was about to happen or there was some sort of crisis going on, what does that tell you perhaps about this picture? What do you think might be going on in this picture? Any ideas? And again, hey, we just got on the scene here. We don't know. We're just putting the pieces together. So no wrong answers. All right, people are worried about something, says Lakewood fifth graders. Southwood wonders if people are arguing. Maybe there's a storm coming, says Diane. Galileo says maybe there's a natural disaster of some sort. Oh, maybe the president is there. Maybe that's why all those people are lined up. Klaus, do you want to unmute and give your idea?
So, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the reason why there's all these cars at a gas station is they're either preparing for some big massive hurricane, or I think the president might be at that very gas station. Someone already said that, but that's just my guess.
Those are great guesses. And yeah, you definitely have some friends here who are guessing the same thing. We also have Southwood observing that some people are getting out of their cars. Okay, that doesn't typically happen until you get up to the pump, right? But you're right, some people are getting out of their cars. Diane says maybe they're getting gas before they leave the area and people are lined up for gas. Kale says there's a shortage. There's not enough gas for everyone. Okay. So we have lots of ideas here, and it sounds to me like something that they have in common is like, this isn't normal. It's not normal to have this many people lined up for gas. So there must be something going on, right? Whether that's the president there, or there's a big storm, or there's a shortage. We're not quite sure, but together as detectives, we've put a lot of pieces together. I'm going to show you another picture. All right, we're going to do the same thing with this one. Drop in the chat your observations about this picture. And does it give any bigger clues about what might be happening? Southwood Elementary friends, they see a sign. Yeah, and that sign has a pretty big clue on it about something that's going on. And Kale, I wonder if you're like, Okay, so it says a sign about a gas shortage. And it says you can only get 10 gallons of gas. Oh, someone is noticing that it is an older looking car, right? So that might give us a little clue about when this was happening. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about when we think this is happening. When do you guys think these pictures were taken? And do you think they were taken at the same time? Okay, someone is saying get the gas before we run out. You can only get a certain amount. The gas pump looks weird, right? They are trying to get gas before it runs out, and Galileo's guess is 1970. Any other guesses about when these pictures were taken? Yeah, it's an old car. So that gives you a clue. Now you could still see a car like that today, right? Kale says 1974. Southwood has a couple guesses, 1980, 1990. Lakewood says 1950. Piscataway says 1978. Klaus, what do you think? Are you going to guess when these were taken? Southwood says 1950.
It looks like that one car might be a collector because the photo is in color. So I'm sort of guessing it might be around the 1990s.
1990s. So the first picture was black and white, and this one's in color. And that's like, we have to really think about that, because there was a time in history when you only had black and white pictures, right? Like color pictures had not yet been invented. Today, though, I can take a picture in color and then I can make it black and white with a filter on my phone, can I? So we today could have black and white pictures and color pictures. So was there a time in history where color photos had been invented, but black and white photos were still really popular to see? Like maybe there was a time where you kind of started to see both, perhaps. So we have to really think about that critically. All right, we have lots of different guesses about when this was taking place, but I noticed no one is saying these pictures are from like yesterday, right? Like we all agree these weren't from like right now. All right. Now, what if we put these pictures side by side? Do you think that they might be related? And now that you've seen them both, do you think you might have a better guess at why all those cars were lined up like that? You can go ahead and drop your answers in the chat. Do you think they're related? Do we have a better idea of why those cars are in line? Okay, so Lakewood now says the cars are waiting for gas. Yeah. There was a gas shortage in both time periods. Gas shortage, everyone is trying to fill up. Yeah. So that big clue on the sign there that there's a gas shortage makes me think, yeah, well, if there's not enough, maybe everyone's trying to get some before it runs out, right? Yeah, then that's what a lot of you are saying too. Good guesses. Okay, so we started with just some photographs. I did not tell you a peep about what they were. And just through making observations and sharing those together, we were able to stitch together a pretty good narrative about what's going on here. So let's fill in some of the blanks, and we'll go to the next slide here. A couple important vocab words before we kind of talk about what those pictures are about. The first word is embargo. An embargo is an official ban on trade with a country. So we live in the United States. You can buy lots of wonderful things here in the United States, but have you ever bought something and looked at the tag and it said like made in Vietnam or made in Mexico? That's because other countries can make some really fabulous things too, and our countries trade those things. There might be things that are more easily made in other countries or things that we can't get here, and we trade so that we can all enjoy them, right? So when an embargo happens is when a country says, no more, we don't want to trade with you anymore. We're gonna ban that and we won't ship it to your country. That's an embargo. The other important word to know and understand is inflation. If you're keeping an eye on current events or watching the news, you're hearing this word a lot right now. But remember, we're not talking about right now, so we'll fill in the blanks in a second. But inflation means rising prices, and those rising prices on all sorts of items means that your money can't buy what it did before. So $1 today doesn't get you as much as it did maybe 6 months ago. Definitely not as much as it got you a year ago. Okay. Now, naturally, that's going to happen. But when that happens more than what is typical and those prices become so high and the value of our money drops so low, that is a big problem. And that is called inflation. Okay, so in the 1970s, so if you guessed somewhere in the 1970s, you were correct. Both of those pictures were taken in the 1970s and taken during something called the energy crisis. I don't mean energy like what you get from an energy drink or what you show when you're playing in your soccer game, but I mean the energy that we use to heat our homes, turn on the lights, and make our cars move. So what happened was in the 1970s, and let's be honest, still today, our country was very dependent on oil to provide that fuel and that energy. And most of that oil came from foreign countries. Now, because of a military action, Middle Eastern countries stopped shipping that oil to the US. They said, no more. We don't like this action that you took. So our response is an embargo. We will no longer ship the oil. This created a limited supply of oil. So guys, what happens when supply goes down? What happens to the price? It goes up, okay? I bet you can think of some examples of where you've seen that happen, especially during, yeah, and Kale is saying the price goes up, and Klaus is saying up, up, up. Exactly. I bet you can think of some examples of that we saw during the pandemic. Right? So the supply goes down, the price goes up, and that has an effect on a lot of different things. What is something, if you remember back to kind of the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, what were some things that were in short supply or things that were suddenly very expensive? Okay, so we're seeing, yep, toilet paper, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, hand sanitizer, cleaners, all of those paper products and cleaning products suddenly were in short supply. Whereas before, you could find those pretty easily. And things like hand sanitizer, the price of it went way up because so many people needed it and wanted it quickly. And now another thing is, did people go out and kind of panic buy all of those things too? Yeah, they did. Kind of reminds me of that picture of everyone lined up for the gas, right? We've got some other ideas too that we've seen in short supply. And hey, these things, some of these things are still in short supply. Meat, plastic gloves, water, gas, graphics cards, and computer chips. Still a big problem with our cars, right? There's a big shortage on cars because of those chips. Great ideas, you guys. So this is just an example of how history keeps coming around, and it's really good to understand so you have an understanding of what's going on in your world today, right? Okay, so during this time, when the price of oil went way up and the supply was way down, that meant that people did not have enough gas for their cars. People had to take turns depending on the number on your license plate. That told you what day you were allowed to go get gas in your car. And many gas stations said you can only get, so many gallons. You can't fill up your tank. You can only have a little bit. And because of that oil going up, gosh, that raised the prices on a lot of things. Because when you go to the grocery store, like, how did that food get there, right? It got there through trucks, through airplanes, and those things depend on fuel too. So the price of a lot of things went way up, and we call this inflation. Now, all of this was happening while President Ford was the president, so it was something that he had to address and try to handle. So if we're looking for historical evidence and we want to learn more about what was going on, about what President Ford did about it, where else could we find information? Drop in the chat, where else could we look? If I said to you, and now I want you to do a report on this, what sorts of primary sources do you think you could find that would help you learn a little bit more about what was going on, about what life was like for people at the time, and about what President Ford did? Can you drop in the chat a few ideas about other places that you might be able to look? Okay, newspapers, yes. And a newspaper, if it's from that time, would be considered a primary source. A textbook. Now, your textbook probably would be a secondary source, because that textbook might use some of those primary sources, but then kind of nicely summarize and tell you about it. And it was probably made after. So that would be a great source, but it would also be a secondary source. Magazines, a press conference, a State of the Union address. Awesome idea. Yes, and all of these things, of course, from that time. So, okay, websites. So Southwood says websites. Now, if we went to a website, if we Googled 1970s energy crisis, we could find a lot of things, and some of them might be primary sources, right? But the website itself would be a secondary source. And I just know that because there wasn't websites during the 1970s, right? But they might have some great primary sources for you to find there. A news program or a radio program from the time. Very good. Okay. Excellent. And whoever said a speech was really reading my mind, because the next primary source that we are going to dig into to learn more about it is, in fact, a speech. So this sheet here, now, don't worry, friends. If you have a couple of sheets that your teacher or parent printed off for you, we are going to use those in just a minute, but we don't need them now. So keep them close by, but don't worry yet. This sheet on your screen right now is a different worksheet that helps us to analyze a video. Now, all of these analysis worksheets come from the National Archives. So if you are going to do a research project and you're going to dig into some primary sources and you want kind of a guide to help you find those clues, if you go to the National Archives Education website, there are wonderful worksheets to help you do that. There are some for older students as well. So if this is looking like you could handle a little more information, there's also a kind of second level analysis sheets as well to help you analyze things like videos, things like documents, things like photographs. So this one on your screen now kind of walks you through how to analyze a video. And that's what we're going to watch together in just a second. So on this sheet, we're going to pay attention to just a few of these pieces. So when I play the video for you on the next slide, I want you to think about this section here, observe its parts. It says, who do you see in the video? Okay. Oh, and Teresa's dropped the link to those in the chat. So teachers, you can kind of grab that if that's something you're interested in. So when we watch the video, we're going to look for who do you see in the video? We're going to look for what activities do you see happening in the video? We're going to look for what places do you see? So who, what, and where. And then we're going to hop over to this other side that says try to make sense of it. And it says, who do you think was supposed to see this video? Okay, so kind of like, why was it made, right? And then along with that, what is the main idea? So as you're watching, be able to think who, what, where, and why. Okay, be ready to answer those after we watch it together. And on this next slide, we are transporting ourselves back to the 1970s with the lava lamp and the macrame and the awesome wallpaper. And I also should point out the television set. Now, during the 1970s, like we talked about, there wasn't websites. There certainly wasn't smartphones where you could quick pull up, what did the president say today? There was only probably 3 TV channels to watch. You couldn't really record them. So if the president was making a speech and you wanted to watch it, you had to be in front of that television set on time so that you could watch it, right? So imagine we're back in the 70s. We have our little TV dinners. We're huddled in front of the TV in the living room. We're going to watch this important speech. And remember, who, what, where, and why. Here we go.
Congress and I cannot do the job. Winning our fight against inflation and waste involves total mobilization of America's greatest resources, the brains, the skills, and the willpower of the American people. Here is what we must do, what each and every one of you can do to help increase food and lower prices, grow more and waste less, to help save scarce fuel in the energy crisis, drive less, heat less. Every housewife knows almost exactly how much she spent for food last week. If you can't spare a penny from your food budget, and I know there are many, surely you can cut the food that you waste by 5%. Every American motorist knows exactly how many miles he or she drives to work or to school every day, and about how much mileage she or he runs up each year. If we all drive at least 5% fewer miles, we can save, almost unbelievably, 250,000 barrels of foreign oil per day. By the end of 1975, most of us can do better than 5% by carpooling, taking the bus, riding bikes, or just plain walking. We can save enough gas by self-discipline to meet our 1 million barrels per day goal. I think there's one final thing that all Americans can do, rich or poor, and that's share with others. We can share burdens as we can share blessings. Sharing is not easy to measure like mileage and family budgets. But I'm sure that 5% more is not nearly enough to ask. So I ask you to share everything you can and a little bit more. And it will strengthen our spirits as well as our economy. Today, I will not take more of the time.
Okay. All right. So get ready to drop your answers into the chat. First question was, who did you see in the video? Who was that? And was there other people that you saw too? Let's see. Okay. The president. And which president? President Ford. Thank you, Lakewood, 5th grade. So President Ford, and who else? Congress. Kale says probably members of Congress. Yep. Anyone else that you think might have been in the audience? Do you think that some of the people may not have been serving in Congress? So you think there may have been just some ordinary citizens in the audience, possibly? All right, let's talk about what did we see? And Lakewood says probably they weren't all members of Congress, right? What did you see happening? Like, what would you call what you just watched? What would we call that? Southwood says a speech. Yeah, and we talked about speeches being good primary sources, right? Lakewood agrees. It's a speech. Okay, so President Ford was giving a speech to members of Congress and probably some ordinary citizens too. How about where? What place did you see? It might have been hard to tell. But if you think it's the president giving a speech to Congress and others, where do you think it could have been happening? Ooh, Diane's jumping to the why about convincing people. Yeah, hang on to that for a second. Okay, so Lakewood says Washington, D.C. Klaus says in the White House. I'm going to say this right, one of these. Piscataway Tech says the Capitol. Kale says the Capitol building. Southwood says the Capitol building. We've got a lot of votes there for Capitol building, and I'm going to agree with you as a primary source detective. And if you said Washington, D.C. or the White House, is really good guesses, because those are places where the president quite often gives addresses like that are televised, maybe from the Oval Office or maybe from the Rose Garden. What we just saw when addressing Congress and others often happens inside the Capitol building, which is in Washington, D.C. All right, now who do you think was supposed to see the video? Only the people in the audience, or perhaps was there more? And this kind of goes hand in hand with the next question about the main idea. So who do you think was supposed to see it? And like, why? What was the main idea? Diane said earlier to convince people. Yeah, convince people what though? Americans, everyone in the US. Yeah. How do you know that? Because what was the message, right? Tell me, what was President Ford's message? To save and to share, says Lakewood. Southwood says to save gas and oil, right? To really kind of encourage people to conserve energy instead. Did he say, hey, everybody go to the gas station as fast as you can and get as much gas as you can? Did he say that? No, he did not say that. He's asking us more to cut back, to conserve, to think of other ways to do that. Now, did people run out to the gas station and try to get as much gas as they could? Yes. Oh, love it. I love it. You said he tried to keep people calm, because if your leader is saying, whoa, it's time to panic, go get as much gas as you can. And, ooh, will that help? Do you think that would have helped the problem? No. So a leader's job quite often is to keep people calm and give good solutions, right? Okay. Very good. And of course, this was in response to what was going on with the oil shortage and the inflation problem. So this was one of the ways President Ford addressed people about how we could come together to solve these problems, right? Okay. Next slide here. Now, this is where if you do have those documents printed off, this is when you will use those. So you will want both the analysis worksheet and the letter, and you'll probably want a pencil too. Now, with the time we have left, we're going to do a little bit of analyzing of this document, but there'll be a lot left for you to do once our class ends as well. Now, if you don't have those, and I noticed Therese just dropped the link into the chat if you want to pull them up, but guess what? If you don't have them, fear not, friends, they will be on the screen and we can go through them together. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't have those things, again, just like President Ford told the Americans, I am telling you, be calm, no worries, no panic. We'll do it together on the screen, okay? But if you do have them, go ahead and you can make notes for yourself as well. We're going to use that document analysis worksheet to do a little detective work with a document. So here is the sheet that you may have in front of you. Again, these are from the National Archives Education site. And this one is all about analyzing a written document. So the first part asks us to meet the document. We're going to look for any special markings that look kind of unique, and we're going to circle the ones that we find. We're going to think about, is it handwritten or is it typed or is it both? That could also maybe give you a clue about when it was written too. We'll see. Write down any words that you don't know. We won't do that one today just because of time, but that is a very smart thing to do when you're analyzing a source. If we look down where it says observe its parts, we're going to think about who wrote it, who read or received it, and the date of the document. And then over on the right side, it says try to make sense of it. What is the main idea? You might want to list a couple of quotes to support that main idea. And then why do you think it was written? All right. So we're going to look at this document together with some of those questions in mind. And the quote here says, some of the best ideas come from your home rather than the White House. So when Gerald Ford addressed Americans about conserving energy and sharing, he also said this, what are your ideas? Please communicate them with the White House and let's get some creative thought going about how to solve some of these problems. And this letter is one that was written. So here we're zoomed in a little bit. And if you have it in front of you, go ahead and read it off the paper. If you're reading it on the screen, that's fine too. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud so that we're all hearing the same thing. So up at the top, there's an address of Moss Point High School, and that's in Mississippi. And then below that, we get, oh, some of us are already making observations. That's great. I'm going to read it, and then I'll go back and read all your things in the chat, okay? But feel free to make those observations in the chat. Underneath that, it says the Honorable Gerald Ford, President of the United States, the White House, Washington, D.C. And then the letter begins. Dear Mr. President, in our business law class at Moss Point High School, Moss Point, Mississippi, we have come up with some suggestions on what we would do in order to help ease the inflation problem. They are, number one, regulate the cooling and heating to approximately 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't make unnecessary trips, combine them into one, use public transport system if possible, form carpools. Number three, use everything wisely, fuel or food. Number four, turn the lights off when not in use. Number five, cook more food than we can eat at one serving and use the rest for another meal. Number six, don't drive where we can walk. Number seven, stay with the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. Don't speed. Number eight, use washer and dishwasher only when loaded to capacity and avoid using the clothes dryer on pretty sunshiny days. Number nine, and so that means that they would hang their clothes out on the clothesline outside, right? So they're saying don't use the energy in the dryer if you can put your clothes out to dry. Number nine, cut down on snacks and save money for more necessary items. Number 10, do our shopping near home. Number 11, use every sheet of paper carefully. And then they say, we respectfully ask the following question. What are you and your family willing to give up? Yours truly, Business Law class. And then they have signed their names. Okay, so if we look at the meet the document section here, are there any special markings that you notice? And if there are, drop them in the chat. Southwood says a special stamp, and Lakewood says red writing. Let's talk first about that red writing. I bet a lot of you noticed that. What do you think that red writing is all about? Like, I didn't read it out loud to you because in my detective brain, I'm not sure that the students wrote that part. So what gives on the red writing? What do you guys think that might be? Who would have written, it says like, dear students, students of the business law class. Any guesses on that? Sometimes when we're looking at these sources, there's mysteries, right? Lakewood says notes by the person who read it. Oh, I totally agree with you. And Southwood says maybe even President Ford. So I think you guys are right. Here's what happens when a letter goes to the White House. And if you've ever written a letter to the White House, yay you, that's awesome. When a letter gets to the White House, they are not all read by the president, even if you've addressed it to the president. At this time, President Ford could have received 10,000 letters every day. There's no way anybody could read 10,000 letters a day and also be the president of the United States, right? But every letter is opened and read that goes to the White House. There's a staff of people, and that's their job, to open the mail, read it, and decide, does the president need to see this letter himself? Does someone else need to see the letter? Do we need to write back to the person who sent it to us? And they also keep track of what the letters are about. So that's another great primary source. You can actually go back and look at those records to see like how many thousands of letters were written about inflation, how many thousands of letters were written to their dog Liberty, right? So they keep track of all the different topics that people are writing about. And at this time, a lot of letters were written about inflation and the gas shortage. So when that letter is opened and read, to me, it looks like somebody took some notes about how they would write them back. So to me, this is a clue that someone did write them back, and they took some notes about like how they would do that and how they might address that letter. So it's a good thing to know, whether you're writing to a representative or a senator or the president, to know that, you know, the person you're writing to might not be the person who sees it at first, but it is going to be read by somebody. And we actually teach a whole class about writing letters. So that we'll save the rest of that for another day. Let's talk now about the stamp. Somebody saw a special stamp. I wonder if you can try to read it. Can you make out what the stamp says? You have to really use your eyes there, detectives, and it would help if you actually had the magnifying glass like on our slides, right? Okay, somebody thinks they see the word liberty. You're close. Lakewood says library. Yes, you're right. So that stamp, and I think it says Gerald, I'm going to look really close at mine. Yeah, Gerald R. Ford Library is what it says in that stamp. Here's why. Another thing that happens when you write a letter to the White House, it gets read by a staff member. It stays there for however long that president is president. But when that president is done being president and they are leaving the White House, they are not allowed to like scoop up all that stuff and take it with them. Letters that are written to the White House or within the White House, also like recordings that are made of meetings and things like that, as well as gifts that presidents receive from like kings and queens of other nations. All of those things are kept by the National Archives. Those are considered property of the government, of the people, not that president. So a letter that you might write to the White House would then be sent to the National Archives, and then eventually would probably make its way to that presidential library. So what that stamp tells me, detectives, is that this letter made its way to the Gerald Ford Library, and that's where it lives today. So if you went to that library in Ann Arbor, Michigan, you could actually ask a librarian to show it to you, and you could look at the real deal. But a lot of these things have been digitized, and you can go to the library's website, which is in the chat, and you can look up different topics and see different letters and communications and all sorts of things about that topic that would help you with your research. All right, so you guys made two really important observations, and that kind of tells us a little bit about the life of this letter. But how about the main idea? Why did these kids get together and spend time? They probably spent a lot of time making this list together. Why did they write it? What was the point? What was the main idea? How do you know that? So drop in the chat, why was the letter written? What was the point? Southwood says to tell the president how to help. Yeah, here's our ideas, right? And we know that the president made that speech, right? Kind of asked people for ideas. Miss Alice's class says because there were a lot of shortages, right? So these were these kids' ideas about how to conserve things. Oh, and that was from Eric. Thank you, Eric. And you're right. All these ideas are how to conserve energy. Kale says, did he ask people to send ideas? And Kale, yes, he did. Now, what I don't know and what I'd have to do further research on is, did he ask people to send ideas and then these kids wrote their letter? Or did they write their letter first? And then he thought, oh, great idea. I'll ask other people for their ideas. I think probably this letter came after that because he did. Remember, he said some of the great ideas come from your house, not the White House. And a lot of people, they should have dated the letter. You're right. And you know, if we had all the documents accompanying this letter, we might find a date on it. I did have a very good detective in a class the other day notice that on her printed out letter, there was a file name on the little computer part. And in that file name, it said 10/25/74. And so we kind of wondered if this letter was from October 25th, 1974. I thought that girl was a pretty good detective for noticing that on the file name, but you're right. I do wish they had put the date right on the body of their letter. So remember that when you're writing letters to the White House to include that date, because hey, kids might like use your letter to study someday, right? Okay, so yes, he asked people for ideas and he got a lot of ideas. One letter I found at the library was from a little girl, and her idea was get rid of cars altogether and everyone needs to ride horses. Now, that didn't really come to be, right? That sounds like a fun idea, but I bet you can think of all sorts of questions you might have about how that would work, right? But a lot of the ideas in this letter are good ones. Another idea that came from the public was lowering the speed limit so that people had to drive a bit slower. Because if you drive slower, you use less gas. So on this next slide, talks about things that did happen. Some of them were results of people writing letters. Other things were the results of President Ford and different policymakers putting their heads together to figure this out, right? Now, the embargo was lifted in 1974, but this whole crisis left long-term effects. And one of those was policy changes, like lowering the speed limit on federal roads. Did everybody like the fact that the speed limit was lower? No, right? But that was one of the solutions that came out of policy. Another one was the creation of the Department of Energy. So people would be getting together to solve these problems together. And then most importantly, a new way of thinking about energy, fuel, and the environment, how to conserve and how to find other sources of energy. So with that, I issue you all your primary source detective badges. You've been a wonderful audience, and I'm going to turn it over to Miss Therese.
Great. We have this extra time for questions. So if you have any questions for Claire, we'll leave a couple of minutes. We'll hang out here. You can either ask on screen or you can go ahead and use the chat box. So does anyone have any questions?
And feel free to ask other questions about President Ford, about my job, about the museum. I'll do my best to answer it. And you know, if I can't answer it, I'll tell you where to find the answer. Thank you from Southwood. Hey, thank you from me to you, Southwood. It was very nice to see you guys today. What school did you teach at? Okay, so I taught most recently at a school called West Michigan Academy of Environmental Science. And before that, I taught at a school called Three Oaks Academy in Muskegon, Michigan. And for the last 6 years, I've been teaching here at the museum. And let's see, can you please send the teachers the YouTube link? Yes, I think that is something, Therese, that you will do, right?
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah. And there was a few other links in the chat today, like to our website. There's some other videos if you're looking for some virtual things to do. And like I said, there's other classes that we offer that we do over Zoom that are free of charge to schools. So if you are looking for something like that, please feel free to contact me.